Welcome, everybody. This is Cindy Stowe with the Office of Telecommunications Services. We are hosting the EIS in-scope review process best practices training course today. It will run approximately to 3 o'clock this afternoon. The session will be recorded, and what we're going to be doing is holding the questions till the end. We have created a pod, a Q&A pod, where you can post questions, and if you're going to post a question, identify what slide that question is related to, if you would, and we'll make sure that we answer all the questions. I know sometimes when you're attending these kind of sessions and there's something that's just burning, just go ahead and document it if you would, or wait till the Q&A session starts. We're also, you'll notice in the files section, we have some PDFs. You can download those. That will be the session documentation today, as well as the solicitation guidance, release 1. I believe it's been sent out before. I'm not quite sure if we have it posted, but you can definitely download it. If you can't get access to that, then you can email the TCC email address or let your telecommunications agency manager know that you need some information. Just from a logistical perspective, if you could please remember, mute your computers, mute your phones, and as always, and I'll probably end with this, you can always visit our training page on the EIS child page and subscribe to it, because every time we add something to it, you get notified, as well as the Interact, the EIS Interact site, where we have been posting some of the sessions. So you can get access to any of our training sessions we've recorded at some point in time. I think with that, we've got Janita I can never pronounce Borba from our contracting and acquisition shop, and we have Micah Goodwin, who's with our solutions development team, and we'll get started with Micah.
Thank you, Cindy. Again, I'm Micah Goodwin. I work in the Price and Technical Development Group in GSA's Office of Telecom Services. One of our responsibilities is supporting the COs in the solicitation scope reviews, specifically in the tech and price area. And as Cindy mentioned, Janita is going to join me in the briefing today. She's one of the principal COs for EIS. So I appreciate people's interest in this topic during this vacation season. I've noticed driving into work that the traffic has been quite relatively light. And I travel in on 66 sometimes, and the tolls there are based on congestion, and I've seen it go $40 or even $50 sometimes, and I've seen it at record lows at $2.50 at times. So that's all going to change in several weeks, though. Of course, the schools come back in. So this is the agenda. Janita and I are going to alternate on some of these topics as we go through this. So the focus, will be on solicitation scope review process, associated best practices, and there will be a discussion of evaluation procedures also. One of the fundamental foundations for a successful scope review is to have a solid solicitation. Next slide. So one way that you can get assistance to develop a solid solicitation is through your Transition Ordering Assistance, or TOA representative, if you have one. So this is a GSA contract where contractors are provided to agencies to assist with that. And if you want to know more about that, you can speak with your telecom agency manager. Also, TOA can arrange to use the solicitation assist tool, which we'll mention shortly. And also want to mention all agencies should have available to them the AAI, or All Agency Inventory. So this is this is a inventory of your networks, your WITs, your LSA information that is available. It's November, and it also provides a crosswalk to the EIS cleanse. So they do the best matchup possible by using that. In some cases, you still have to, it may not be possible to match up. But so that, I want to mention that resource is available. We wanted to mention, I mentioned this in the last slide about the solicitation assist tool. This was developed so that we could provide assistance to the agencies to craft their solicitation. This is where like a team will come out to your location. They'll spend a couple hours gathering your requirements. That is one of the things you have to have, is your requirements together. They'll record that in the session, and then at the end of the session, they will provide a Word document where the solicitation will be about 80% complete. So it will be in the uniform contract format. Services will be properly identified. There'll be the proper FAR references. There's also a price template. So that's all provided when you have a session with them, and then any customization you need to do to that document, you just do it in Word. So it also incorporates best practices. As we learn about things, we modify the tool to give enhancements. Like we've added some PWS language to make it FAR compliant, and we're working on producing like statement of objective type documents from that also. So as time goes on, we add things to it. So again, you can arrange a session with your TOA rep or your account manager, agency manager. There's also some self-help resources. This is where you can learn about the contract, about best practices. And here we're just listing the two pricers that are available. The public pricer, which is publicly available, no credentials required, and then there's the agency pricer, which has does require credentials. So I'll just point out that both of these pricers provide service guides, and what that is are concise descriptions of the service with examples of pricing. Instead of reading a dense RFP or contract language, this puts it in easily understood form. And then for the agency pricer also, you have access to unredacted contract files. And something we'll mention is that this is also where you submit your solicitation for scope review. Next. And then we just want to mention that there's other resources available, the MOPS, or Management and Operations Handbook, Fair Opportunity, Ordering Guides, and other topics on training is available on these websites that we provide here. So plenty of information to help you write a solid solicitation. So now we'll start talking about the review process. So GSA needs to review solicitations that are above the simplified acquisition threshold. That was a proposed change has been made, moving that threshold from 150,000 to 250,000. Has not been incorporated with the FAR yet, that change, but you may want to check with your agency's policy whether they recognize that change at this point, even though it's not incorporated into the FAR yet. Also, want to mention that when you do the submission through the tool, that these are supposed to be final solicitations. They should not be drafts. If it is a draft, it will be rejected. GSA will review the solicitation, determine whether it's within scope, and report back its findings with comments in the actual documents that you provide. Also, want to note that there's not going to be we're not going to rewrite the solicitation. We sometimes provide comments that speak to improving the solicitation, something beyond the scope, but that's not going to be extensive. The main purpose is to review it and tell you whether it's in scope, and there will be helpful comments in there, but it's certainly not going to be a rewrite. So there are basically 3 stages of a review of the solicitations. There's terms and conditions, T's and C's. There's a technical review, and then a price review. So this slide shows the depiction of that process. So essentially in the upper left there, that's where you're going to submit your solicitation and anything related, important documents related to that. So your requirements documents, price template, any other important attachments. So those will be submitted, and we'll talk about the tool that's submitted by. And then, as we said, in the boxes shown there, it goes through the CO first reviews it with the terms and conditions, then it goes into a technical review, followed by a price review, and then the CO wraps up, looks at all the comments and determines whether the solicitation is in scope. Now it's shown here that this is like a serial process, but it's really a combination of serial and parallel. So as resources permit, when it first comes in, the CO does the first review, but we often start the price and tech in parallel. And but for us to formally finish out each review, the one prior to it needs to be finished. So, so it is a combination of parallel and serial processes. And then, as mentioned, there will be an output where your documents are sent back with our comments and a determination of whether it's in scope or not. And this is a sort of a simplified description of the process. Of course, there's discussions that happen between the groups as reviews are done, and as we get comments from the COs, we consider that as review the technical, and those are passed on to the price, and there might be feedback going the other way too. So again, the focus is on doing the scope review. We're not going to have extensive comments as mentioned, but we will provide. We do highly recommend that you do review the comments. They're there to help you have a better solicitation and and there might be things that you need to correct. You might be having incorrect references and things like that. So it's important to review that. So, as mentioned, the solicitations are submitted through the scope review tool. So, and yeah, this is a screenshot of that where you go into the agency pricer, and here you can see the drop down for tools. You click that, and you can see third from the bottom, it says scope review. And you click in that, and it's a fairly simple process to make the submission. It's basically upload it, your documents. You give some information such as point of contact and the name of the solicitation. And can you go back one slide? I just want to make the point that the requester is really, whoever puts this in is the point of contact. So any communications regarding what stage the solicitation is in will go back to the requester. So it's important, if there are other people that need to be informed, that the requester notifies them, because they will get, currently they will get all the correspondence. We are adding more fields there so that other people can get information back on the status of the solicitation. So once it's submitted, you'll get a receipt that shows it's been submitted. As it goes from each stage, from the initial review to price to tech, you'll receive updates, emails on that, and then the final submission, you'll get a notice of, or the final review, you will get a notice of that, and you just simply need to log back in the tool, and you can download your documents from there. So that is the tool, and it provides a record of all the steps that went through, and again, you can get your documents back with all comments embedded. If you have any trouble using the tool, anything of that nature, there's of course a help desk. Some agencies also ask their agency manager to also submit for them, which can be done. So, of course, when agencies submit, they're interested in, how long is the review time? Is it going to take? And our goal is to process these as fast as we can. It should be no surprise, though, that the time is variable. It relies on a number of factors, such as the length and complexity of the solicitation. We have solicitations that are up to 500 pages, for example. That's going to be different than an 80-page solicitation to review. The quality of the solicitation does matter. If it's if there are a lot of ambiguities, it's just going to take a lot longer to review it. One of the big factors also are whether how many do we have in simultaneously. We have a number of folks devoted to these reviews. However, resources are not unlimited, and currently we have a forecast of 200 solicitations. We've received about 16 so far. So at some point there is going to be a deluge of these, and there will be longer review times if they come in. Many come in simultaneously. So our advice is to get them in as soon as possible. Right now, it's a relatively light load, and that will change because not only do we do the reviews of the initial ones, sometimes they get rejected and then multiple reviews or another review has to be done. So it's going to be well over 200 reviews that we're going to have to do. And I would say, you know, it could take up to several weeks. I would not expect, for example, it would not be common for a solicitation to come into us and be reviewed that same week. So build that into your schedule. You know, it could take up to several weeks. Right now, it's a little, maybe averaging a little over 2 weeks for a review. But as I said, workload, how many are in queue could easily change those figures. So again, we recommend highly that you get them in as soon as possible. And just want to reiterate, if you ever want status on your review, one way is to go into the tool and look at what stage it's in, or you can contact your AM and we can coordinate with them to provide any updates. So we've given an overview, and now we're going to go into sort of more detail of each stage of the review. So Janita is going to speak to the first step regarding terms and conditions.
Thank you, Micah. This is Janita Borba. I'm one of the contracting officers under EIS, as Micah had already introduced. This is a disclaimer. The following represents GSA's guidance on solicitation best practices, and it's based on our reviews of past solicitations and also establishing task force evaluation procedures that's based out of FAR 16505. As Micah has already presented, the primary purpose of the solicitation review is to ensure that services being procured are within the scope of the EIS contract, and we do provide comments at times that may improve the quality of your RFP. If an agency chooses not to amend their RFP based on our comments, this is solely your decision, and we're not an enforcement agency. Next slide, please. The following recommended scope considerations have been developed, again, based on reviewing terms and conditions of previous solicitations, and this is from a contracting standpoint. So the first item here, your solicitation needs to include clear, well-defined, concise requirements. So just like any other acquisition, the vendors need to know your forecast of the requirements that you intend to transition and or purchase and what they're going to be awarded. So I refer to these as mandatory requirements or required requirements, however you guys would like to state that. So for anything that's not included in these mandatory requirements, but you may wish to purchase in the future, such as things like additional quantities, additional services, increased bandwidth, just to name a few examples, these would be considered your option to buy requirements or price options. And I will go over that in more detail further along in this presentation. But these option to buy requirements need to be included in your solicitation. Vendors need to price them. They need to be evaluated and included as part of your total evaluated price. So if you include mandatory and optional requirements in your solicitation, you need to correctly list them and label them in sections B, C, and the price model of your solicitation. You need to distinguish which ones are mandatory versus which ones are optional to buy. Also, you need to ensure all applicable sections are included in the agency solicitation. It's not mandatory for you to use the UCF format. However, in order to facilitate a quicker review, it's recommended that you do use the UCF. Ensure the solicitation does not include redundant clauses. So there's a lot of EIS contract clauses already included. They form your task order. So you do not need to reiterate the same clauses into your task order. Ensure solicitation does not include any clauses that contradict the EIS clauses. For example, if you add cost reimbursement clauses, that's not allowable under EIS. Next slide, please. This is a continuation. So also you want to ensure the solicitation does not include restrictive or unrealistic evaluation criteria. You want to ensure the solicitation does not request a small business subcontracting plan. So agencies are actually prohibited from requesting a small business subcontracting plan in their solicitation because one was already requested at the contract level. So FAR 19-705-2E clearly states that a contract may not have more than one plan. However, you are able to include and monitor subcontracting goals at the order level as long as those goals do not contradict the goals established for EIS. So also you want to ensure the solicitation does not include, it includes a period of performance that's consistent with the period of performance of EIS. EIS ends July 30th, 2032. Ensure the task order is either fixed price or time and materials. Ensure the task order or solicitation does not appear to be an IDIQ under an IDIQ. You cannot have a menu or a BPA or letter contracts. Those are not permissible. Ensure the OCO listed has a DPA, a delegation of procurement authority, and include that letter in your solicitation. Next slide, please. So GSA further recommends the following solicitation considerations and best practices. Again, do not include evaluation criteria that restricts competition. An example would be criteria that is based on vendors that have passed BSS functional testing and or received an ATO, or based on CBSAs vendors already have on contract. The vendors may take an exception to those terms if you do include that in your evaluation criteria. So we recommend that you do not include those. Do not include any Part 12 commercial clauses. EIS is not a commercial contract. Let's see. Do not include any liquidated damages that duplicate the SLA credits already included in the EIS contract. Also, proposal versus quote versus bid. Agencies should be requesting proposals or offers. Do not use the words proposal, quotes, and bids interchangeably because they don't mean the same thing in federal contracting. Clearly state what prices are included in your total evaluated price and how it is calculated. Also, don't refer to the task order as a contract. They're two different contractual vehicles. This is a task order. The contract is the IDIQ. And must include and evaluate the entire requirement in the solicitation. So that includes any option year and or optional to buy claims in order to be in compliance with FAR 17206 and 17207. So in order to stay within the four corners of the FAR and exercise an option, either option year or optional to buy claims, you need to be able to get prices for all years and evaluate them up front. So no one can anticipate everything, so taking an exception to fair opportunity may be required at times. Next slide. So you may consider creating option to buy requirements, also referred to as price options or optional claims. And this is to allow for things like additional quantities, additional services, inside moves, ads, or changes. Optional to buy claims, they're mandatory for the vendors to propose, but optional for the agency to buy. They're based on estimated forecasted quantities using past actions inventory. They must be priced as part of the proposal and evaluated. You have to include the prices as part of your total evaluated price. They're only exercised as needed and therefore only funded when exercised. And you would have to create a homegrown clause in Section 8 to allow for option to increase quantities of services. Currently, there is not a FAR clause to increase quantities of services. There is an option to increase quantities of supplies, so 52217.6 and 52218.7. You could take some language out of those clauses, but again, you'd have to create your homegrown clause and not refer to any of the FAR clauses when you're doing this. Some sample language, you can include a statement that says something like the option provision allows the optional to buy claims to be exercised more than once as needed in whole or in part during the life. The government reserves the right to order anywhere from the minimum to maximum quantity of the option. And that's just some sample language. You can create your own. Based on those two clauses, you can tweak it however your agency sees fit and have your legal department review your language. You also need to include instructions on what you would like the offers to propose in regards to the option to buy requirements in Section L of your solicitation. Section M needs to include instructions on how you plan to, not instructions, but how you plan to evaluate those optional claims. Things like if the optional claims will count towards your award, if it will have different evaluation criteria than your mandatory requirements, or if it will be evaluated based on pass or fail or some other adjectival rating system. Next slide, please. Another consideration, agencies may want to consider tying task order option year pricing to the economic price adjustment clause under EIS. It's in section H.19. So, for example, this is some sample language that you may choose to incorporate. The agency may include a clause in its task order solicitation that states that the task order prices for years FY23 and FY32, which are the years that we exercise our options under EIS, will be adjusted based on the refresh prices in the first and second option period. The agency may also choose to include some language such as the contract prices have to be at or below the EIS refresh prices, that your task order prices cannot exceed the EIS refresh prices. So if the task order prices exceed the EIS refresh prices, then the CLIN price will be adjusted to match the EIS refresh price by way of mod. So they would have to modify your task order. Or you can add some language that the refresh prices will match the discounts provided in their original proposals. Another alternative would be agencies may choose to create its own unique EPA clause similar to H19 for your TUCs, ICB claims, and catalog prices. That's just another alternative you could use. And now I hand this presentation back over to Michael, who will be describing the technical portion of the review.
Thank you, Janita. Yeah, so we're going to go over the technical now. So some of the scope considerations there are, one thing we want to do is ensure that EIS services are correctly identified in the solicitation. If we think you're talking about VPNS and you've identified it as IPS or by mistake, that is something we're going to identify. So we want to be sure requirements match up to the EIS contract to the greatest extent possible. Also, we're going to identify anything that we see new to the that goes beyond what's in the contract, the requirements in the contract, or if like a new service is trying to be added to the through the solicitation, we'll identify that. Normally, new services we'd want to add to our base contract. So that would be an example. We look for language that may limit competition, like if you listed AT&T net bonding to connect to the cloud services, that could be restrictive, obviously, to one vendor. So those are things we would point out. I mean, we're looking for things that are in scope. We're looking for things that could create risk for a protest, and we're trying to assure that there's clarity there. Identify ambiguities. So some of our best practices and recommendations are actually to review the service guides that I mentioned earlier so that services are thoroughly understood. And also, if you want deeper detail, you can go into the contract or the RFP, sections B and C, so to fully understand the services that you're requesting. And the KPIs, are they consistent with the contract? Sometimes agencies want something stricter, which is fine, but sometimes they don't realize what the KPIs are on the contract, and sometimes in a solicitation, an agency may list a weaker KPI than what's actually on the contract. So those are things that we will point out. And also, the more clarity you provide, the better responses you're going to get back from the vendors. It's going to save you time in the end. So continuing on. So one thing that we'll look at is if you're bundling services. Bundling has a place, of course, in the task orders, but there's a risk there that things can be obfuscated when it's bundled together. So it can be hard to determine your inventory, and you also want to think about you make a bundle and you have a price for it, and then one of the components changes in that bundle. Do you have a way of determining the price for that bundle? So those are things to consider for bundling. It has a place, but there are risks to doing that. Also, this goes along with clarity, providing clarity. That's illustrations of what you're describing are important, whether it's network layout or trying to obtain diversity in your requirements. Diagrams are extremely helpful there. Again, any clarity that you can provide to the solicitation is going to be quite helpful. And if we do see a solicitation that we're providing a lot of comments on, that we think that the agency's having trouble coming across with a solid solicitation, we may recommend a tool session where you go to the solicitation assist tool if you haven't done that already. And so you want to provide as much information as you can that makes sense to the vendors, but if you have sensitive data that's not necessary to include in the solicitation, then we'd recommend that you not include that. And then on the management and operations side, there's a rich set of reporting and data requirements already on the contract, and we've listed them here. And instead of creating your own, we highly recommend that you review these, and these may satisfy all or most of your needs. These have been well thought out. There's SLAs involved here and how to measure them. So we highly recommend that you review these, and they come along with your task order, and you may not need to create your own on these. And then, so that's the tech review, and then we move to the price review.
With this 1 minute, we've lost our connection. Can we do a sound check?
Loud and clear. Yes, we can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Can you see our screen now?
Probably not.
Got it.
Oh.
Mine's weird. It was still on that slide.
You're still on. Okay.
Okay,
Okay, so we're on in-scope considerations. Next slide.
on 21.
22.
21. You want to go to 22?
Yes.
22, okay.
He's showing.
Thank you.
I'm showing slides.
He's up there.
Me.
Okay.
Okay. So we're on in-scope considerations. So for price review. So we want to ensure that the claims you're listing are valid if you're using EIS claims. Of course, we don't want you to redefine EIS claims either. So we will look for that. If specifying or requesting that offers propose optional claim quantities, or if they're to propose optional claims, then you'd want to include quantities. This is you'll notice that there's some overlap with what the COs review and what we review. So that Janita went into detail over that kind of review. So if you have optional claims, all of them should not be listed with a quantity of 1. There should be real quantities provided there for what your expectations are for using those in the future. We'll also look at the pricing template for consistency with what you specified in Section B. There might be services listed in your Section B, but you've got the price template and they aren't listed there.
One minute, please. The slide that we're showing, there we go. Okay.
Huh.
Yeah, it was fine here. It's something we're doing in the room. Okay.
But
It's filled in there.
It just now filled in, yeah. Might have been phased.
Here we go.
okay.
Okay.
Good. And then, let's see, we're on 22. Yeah. So we're also going to look at the technical requirements and see how they match up to the price requirements. Again, you're mentioning services and the technical requirements. You're mentioning VP&S, for example. In the technical requirements, we should see that in Section B with the appropriate CLIN. So we're looking for those types of consistencies. So next slide, please. All right. So we highly recommend that you provide your inventory and your forecasts. You can do this in your price template or with attachments. It's very helpful for the agencies to know what you have and where you're going, where you want to go if you determine that in terms of forecasts. Another best practice is providing a price template. We think that's highly important, that it provides consistency in what you receive back from the vendors. Remember, you could have, I guess we're up to 9 now vendors. So providing a price template will ensure that consistency back to you. Also, we ask or we recommend you use either the EIS CLINs or task order specific pricing CLINs. This is where basically any CLIN on the contract, you can associate a task order number with it, and you can get a different, hopefully lower price than what you have on the contract. So that's the most visible way of getting lower prices on the contract. And you can do task order unique CLINs, but there you need to specify your own technical requirements and get your own pricing. And the CLINs themselves don't have strong descriptions to them. So it's easy to lose visibility into your inventory and also compare those prices to others. when you use TUCs. TUCs they're very powerful, and they have a place, especially if you're doing customized kind of requirements. But we first would recommend looking at the base contract CLINs and associating your task order number with it and attempting to get lower prices. And to that end, in your pricing sheet, you should have a column where a task order number can be entered to associate with that CLIN, and a case number, like if these are ICB type or equipment, you need case numbers. So we recommend having those columns available in the price templates. Other best practices? Is the following. So we talked about TUCs, minimize them, and they have a place, but as I said, task order specific pricing is probably your first option. And then you can link your task order pricing to the base contract CLINs. You may want to link them such that if there's a price reduction on the base contract, that you have that that carries over to your task order CLINs. We also recommend you can provide addresses of your locations, but what's even better is using network site codes. These are industry standard codes that provide precise addresses. It's unambiguous, where when you enter an address, there's multiple ways of spelling street and other things, and can introduce ambiguities. So if you want to get the network site codes, we have those available through the pricers, where you can enter addresses and it will give you back site codes. And there's also a bulk loader tool where you can take a CSV file of your addresses and load it up, hundreds of them if you have them, and it can provide the network site codes for those locations. We also included a statement here. I won't read it, but we recommend having this in your solicitation. And what it basically states is that you're looking for a complete solution. Wherever they send back to you is complete, and that anything that they didn't specify is either included in the prices that they've submitted back to you, or it's going to be provided at no cost. So it's to prevent them, you making an award and then them coming back, the vendor coming back and saying, well, that wasn't a complete solution. You actually need to buy these other items. So this avoids that that kind of situation. Next, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of our observations when we've reviewed solicitations. Like I said, we reviewed about 14, and we got 2 in process now. So these are some of the things that we think would be helpful, and that is providing to the vendors in your solicitation sort of a crosswalk of if you're going to specify a particular service from the EIS contract, tell them where it is in the solicitation, where the technical portion is and where the price portion is. Also, we recommend if you make any, if you deviate from what's in the EIS contract, tell the vendor somewhere up front where you're making those deviations in like technical requirements. Because especially, if you got a 500-page solicitation, they could easily miss that if it's buried in the contract somewhere. So providing cross-references and noting where you've made these deviations, that's going to ensure that the vendors catch that, and it's going to save you time when it comes to evaluating and not having to discuss it, or someone had missed it and could jeopardize your evaluation. So that's one of the recommendations. Next slide, please. These are some others. We do recommend that you have some kind of strategy to modernize, and of course you want a transition strategy. It's helpful that you provide that up front, we find, and it should be clear to the vendors so that they understand where you're going with your solicitation. To have to read the whole solicitation and try and sort of infer what the strategy is not as good as being explicit about it and telling them up front, maybe at the beginning of Section C, what the strategy is. We also recommend structuring the period of performance so that it aligns with the fiscal years. That can help with coordinating funding and getting the appropriate funding for your base period and also the subsequent options. And putting the period of performance, we're recommending sections F or H and specify it once. We've seen solicitations where it's listed multiple times, and that can lead to confusion and errors if it's different in one section versus another. Also, sometimes some solicitations show that there isn't a complete understanding of the EIS services and contracts. So there we're, of course, recommending that you go to the resources that we mentioned up front. We've also seen cases where there's inconsistencies between sections. So a service could be listed in Section C that's not mentioned in B. You want to be sure those are, you have the correct correspondence. We've also seen, in the price template, there might be a technical requirement that's placed in there. So it's probably more appropriate to have that in Section C. So those are some things to look for. We've seen cases where inventory is not provided, and as we mentioned up front, you can get your all-agency inventory. I think you want to provide that as a minimum, and you can get that by your TOA rep or contacting your AM. So we talked a little bit about SLAs. Rely on the contract SLAs unless you really do need something that's different than that. And also, we've seen cases where critical service is listed in the solicitation. It's not clearly defined, and so you define it, and you also could reference the relevant CLINs, such as access, diversity, and avoidance CLINs. Occasionally when we see managed network services listed, it's not clear what the requirements are for it in some solicitations. And so that's an area to look at, and it may not be clear what services it's applicable to either. So the more clarity you can provide there, the better. And then at the end, we got this sort of alphabet soup here, but these are things that can be overlooked. Service-related equipment is the first one. Service-related labor is another. Cable and wire service. NSEP, or National Security Emergency Preparedness, or telecom service priority. That is where you can add basically a feature to your important circuits so that when there's like a natural disaster, for example, that your critical circuits are restored before others are. So that's something to consider when developing your solicitation and identifying those claims. Next, please. Okay. So I said this many times. If it is found in scope, you will get a notice that says so, and then you can log into your account on the agency. It's on the agency pricer, but the scope review tool there on the agency pricer. And you can, if there are some comments in there, you've been found in scope and there's some comments, you can make the changes. You don't have to submit it for another in scope. You can then release the solicitation. And we're recommending that you do it on eBuy under this SIN EIS contracts. So there's multiple reasons for that. One is it ensures that the proper vendors receive the solicitation, and it also provides a record that this went out to them, and GSA can actually track that it has been released. We do try to, the AMs do try to get that information from the agency, but this is a backup to that, so that's why we're recommending that. And again, please review the comments, even if it's found in scope. Oftentimes there's things that do need to be corrected, and it's going to create confusion if those things are not corrected. And we'll give suggestions on some best practices, but again, we're not doing a rewrite of the solicitation. It's helpful comments and telling you basically whether it's in scope or not. But the better solicitation you have, the better, more likelihood you're going to get quality proposals back and eventually get the requirements you need when you make an award. Next. So if it is rejected, don't panic. You know, in the solicitation, we will provide our comments as to why it may not have. We believe it's not in scope. There will be a meeting coordinated with the AM and us to discuss any of the issues there. This has happened before, and in most cases, pretty quickly we're able to get a solicitation back where we do a review. Of course, we reviewed it before, so it's going to go faster. And things, we've had experience where things are corrected and we found solicitations in scope after they were rejected. So that pretty much concludes the processes on the scope reviews. I'm going to turn it back to Janita, who is going to talk about evaluation criteria.
Yep. And establishment of evaluation criteria factors, it's solely up to your government agency. So under FAR Part 16505, you may actually limit the number of evaluation criteria factors that you create, and that's depending on the complexity of your requirements. The services under EIS have already been favorably evaluated, so it's up to your agency if you want to duplicate the efforts we have already done on the IDIQ. But in the FAR 16505, price must be considered as one of your factors when you do your selection, your fair opportunity decision. And these non-price factors are only suggestions, examples that you may wish to consider. You do not have to. You may wish to consider. So past performance, according to FAR 16505, you should consider it. It doesn't mean that you must include that. It's just something that you must consider or should consider is the terminology used in the FAR. And for example, for past performance, GSA has already evaluated past performance on the 4 mandatory services of the EIS contract, which are voice, VPNS, Ethernet transport, and MNS. So it's one of GSA's recommendations that agencies consider asking for past performance on only the services outside of those 4. I mean, that's up to your agency. It's just a recommendation. You could still include past performance on all services if you'd like. And 3 other factors that GSA suggests or that are examples. You may want to consider having a technical approach factor. You may want to consider asking the offer to explain with clarity, detail its technical solution, and describe how that solution meets or exceeds the goals and objectives of your solicitation. Another example would be a transition approach. This would be a great factor to ask for since it was not evaluated under EIS. You may want to consider asking the offer to describe its processes and approach for transitioning your current network services from the current networks with 3 and LSA contracts to EIS. And you might wish to see their solution on doing so. And the last suggested criteria would be maybe like a management approach factor. And you may want to consider asking the offer to submit a management plan or resumes for key personnel. Next slide, please. All right. Under FAR Part 16505, FAR Part 15.3 do not apply to the ordering process. And in fact, if you use FAR 15 terminology and you do get protested, GAO may even treat your solicitation as a FAR 15 procurement rather than a FAR 16505. So that is something that you should really note and avoid using any FAR 15 language in your solicitation, especially in Section M. Item number 2, formal evaluation plans or scoring of offers are not required. That's optional for you. FAR 16505 also states that when your order exceeds $5.5 million, you have to disclose the significant factors and sub-factors, including price, that the agency expects to consider when you evaluate proposals and their relative importance. And then when your award is made on best value, you have to include a written statement documenting the basis for award and the relevant importance of quality and price factors. Next slide. Your decision documentation for your task order has to be noted in your contract file. So you have to include the rationale for how you determine that the order placement and price of each order, including your basis for award and the rationale for any trade-offs among cost or price and non-cost considerations in making the award decision. This documentation does not need to quantify the trade-offs that led to the decision. Next slide, please. As Micah has already indicated, that we have a wealth of resources that you should access in order to get further guidance on EIS, including websites. We have the EIS websites, we have the pricer, we have the transition webpage, and we have account managers. So we have a wealth of information for you. And actually that concludes the presentation for today. So we will now open it up for questions.
How do you want questions?
Do you have the ability to raise their hand? Everybody's unmuted.
What happened to the pod?
You want to post in the pod?
Is there a way to see how many?
In the pod.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, we recommend you post your question in the pod in case multiple questions come in at the same time. We want to just take those in order and address those individually.
Either that or type your name in the Q&A. If you don't want to type the whole question.
Well, and as folks are thinking about that at the end of the session, we will be sending a copy of the slides and a link to the recording.
Do we have any questions? Oh, we got a taker.
Okay, under scenario 3 of the white paper on task orders, what is task order project? Under scenario 3. Did we have a slide? Do you recall what slide that might have been on? It's not on the slide. We have a definition of task order 3 in section G of the EIS contract of task order projects. I don't know off the top of my head. Okay, so we're suggesting you go ahead and check that. Yeah, it's in G. Task order project is defined. Okay, looking at a multiple task order to single FO. Okay. So that's in section G. I'm not familiar with the white paper they're referring to. Robin, are those the use cases that you're referencing?
This is Robin. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. It's called Enterprise Infrastructure Services, Contract Task Orders, Service Orders, and their uses. It goes through planning, solicitation, implementation, and it shows 3 scenarios. It shows you issue a fair opportunity and a task order, and then place service orders. On the second scenario is you can issue a fair opportunity as a task order and do service orders directly as a task order. And the third one, it shows fair opportunity, task order, and then it says task order projects, service orders. So I'm from a large, complex organization that's going to have multiple agencies soliciting under a fair opportunity, and I didn't know what task order projects are and how I would identify that in a solicitation.
Okay, Robin, this is Cindy. What we're going to do is, because that was a totally, that's an older presentation that we had. Matt is your agency manager along, I believe, Andrew Lowe. So what we'll do is we'll take that question. We'll have them reach out to you. How about that? And then what we'll do is we'll post the question on the Q&A after.
Okay. That'll work. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe Matt is on the call today anyway, and I'll see him before I leave.
Okay, we had another question about addressing after award. After fair opportunity award, circuit fiber build special construction charges. And as I recall, the first time we did this session, that was a big topic, special construction. So is the question relative to making sure that in your solicitation you include language such that there's no surprises about special construction? That's what I seem to recall the issue to be. Is that right, Mr. Conwell? Okay, so we explicitly talk about special construction in section C2911 and B2918, B2919 for special construction. If you don't include the language in your solicitation, they're not going to price special construction, so you do have to include some language in your solicitation that specifies that. And maybe this is up to each agency. Maybe you might want to ask them to do samples of sites or maybe get site surveys. They're not going to be able to do that for every site before they bid if you have like hundreds of sites, but maybe they could do a sample or these are just some ideas. Also, maybe Micah might have some more.
Could they do a not to exceed?
They could do a not to exceed.
So get the sort of the maximum price is another possibility.
Yeah, but the key is to include special construction language in your solicitation. Like you have to have that.
Would that be a separate line item in section B or in a price table?
It could be. It could be a CLIN, maybe a TUC.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I mean, offhand, I don't know if there's like special construction CLINs. They might already be built into EIS. I don't recall.
Pretty sure there are.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Maybe that would be in B2918.
We had another question. Is there a way to see the numbers of agencies that have submitted solicitations? This can be a gauge of how an agency might be doing compared to the field.
Currently, we are doing some sort of report for solicitations that Debbie Wren's group is providing. I think that's quarterly.
But that will be posted online. So just all you have to do is just subscribe to the EIS landing page. If you go down to transition and subscribe there, I believe that it's going to be posted there at some point in time. John, we can take that one offline as well.
But as I said, the current state is we have 14 that have been reviewed, have been found in scope, and then there's another 2 that are in process right now. So that's the current situation.
Can you say who those 14 are, Micah?
Not right now, John. That's internal information right now.
Yeah, until agency releases their solicitation, we're not at liberty to say that.
Okay. Another question. Under terms and conditions, can we have multiple DPA COs?
Yes.
Okay, and then there was a question, is there a way to let participants see the questions that are being answered? And we collect all of the questions and then collect the responses as well and provide them at a later time after the presentation and the URL to the recordings. That gives everyone an opportunity to review them and build on them before we send them out. Okay, another question. Explain again if my task order covers all service name types in a service area, how do not appear to be an IDIQ, and how do we make sure that it doesn't appear to be an IDIQ within an IDIQ?
Okay, and that just goes back to the mandatory versus optional CLIN theory. You first must specify, based on your best forecast, what your requirements are, and that's considered your mandatory requirements. And then you would ask for things that you know that you may need in the future, things meaning CLINs, optional quantities, optional services that you may not need on day one, but you will need, and those also get priced. And you would specify language in your solicitation that you have an intent to exercise those options. It's just not on day one. Again, you'd create a clause in H. You have to add language in section B that say these are the optional plans that you want priced. So there is, you must have a mandatory, a required requirement. You cannot have only optional plans, or you have to, or else you don't have a requirement. So you do need to specify clearly what are your mandatory requirements. And then anything outside of that would be an optional.
Okay, well, thank you.
I did want to, just following up on special construction, there is a special construction claim. It's an ICB claim. It's in B2919. Called Special Access Construction.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for the Q&A pod?
I do want to also say that the task order project, if they want to look that up themselves, it's in G.3.3.3.3. So, or number 3.
Could you say that again? Was that golf? 3.3.3?
Dot 3, there's 4 3s.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A pod.
Okay. So, wow, we ended a little bit earlier than we anticipated. So I want to thank everybody for joining our call today. We'll probably be slowing down for the rest of the summer. I think we do have one that's coming, one last one that's coming up, though.
The hosted replay.
The hosted replay. So many of you probably saw the invitation to that one. Again, if you subscribe to our pages, whether it be on our web pages or whether it be on Interact, you'll be notified. Always feel free to reach out to your telecommunications agency manager and with any questions that you might have. Something might strike your mind after an hour or so after maybe today's session, or when you're starting to breeze through some of the materials. The agency managers can get you in touch with the right resource if they don't have the answer. So with that, Micah, Janida, go ahead.
Will this presentation be sent to everybody, or will it be on Interact?
It's right there where you can download it in the files, and also we will be sending it out, right? We'll be sending it out to our participants, easy for you to say, the participants for today's session. With a link to the recording as well. We'll probably go through it, make sure everything's cleaned up, and we'll be ready to go. But I think, do we have another question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
One last question?
It was mentioned that we should include transition approach as part of the evaluation criteria. Would this not favor the incumbent?
This is just a GSA recommendation, and it may or may not favor the incumbent, but you might want to know how that vendor plans to transition their circuit. So it depends on how you set up your criteria or what you ask for. So if you're asking them, do they have transition experience, or are you just wanting to know how they, like their plan, or their, how, like what they intend to do, or how are they going to provide a transition solution to you. So it depends on how you word that evaluation criteria. And it's up to the agency if you even want to use that as one of the evaluation criteria. It's just a sample of something that you can choose to consider, and it's up to your agency.
Okay. Well, with that, Janida, Micah, thank you very much. The team, thank you for your support, and everybody have a good day. Thank you very much.